Welcome back to another episode of Real Wealth Podcast. We took a break on our episodes for a while, so this would be one of the first one or two coming back out. We've gone under the hood really hard with our practice here at Leading Edge Financial Planning, now doing business as Steward Right.
Good update. Thank you.
So we are updating our brand. Actually, it's a full rebrand. Gardner Design helped us with that.
Cool.
And really, I think it lands really well with our client relationships. So it's being sponsored by Steward Right, not Leading Edge Financial Planning anymore. One and the same, I guess. But stewardship is our craft. So that's what we're running with. And
what does stewardship mean to you?
I'll ask the questions here, sir.
Hey,
I'm the host.
That's a softball for you.
We are charged with taking care of what's been appointed to us. And, I think of the parable of the three different, servants, but stewards. Mm-hmm. One shoved it under a rock. In this industry, I'd call that a annuity.
Okay.
Another
fired.
Another put it to work, and another multiplied it more aggressively, and he was excellently pleased with the third. Yeah. So we got an in-house portfolio manager who's been doing active management for us. We've gone away from the passive management, which is 99% of the industry. Wow. And he's creating good results.
Cool.
It's been a very, very good move. You get the right person who's talented, who's wired for it, who's got the experience, and wonderful. We've added 4 team members this year, and we're changing over our trading software, reporting software, about to move to our CRM, redoing our agreements with our clients to fit having an in-house portfolio manager, which is most of the way done. But we've been super busy this year, which is why I haven't. That's why I took my foot off the pedal with the podcast, because it does take time. Yeah. We were back to making the video editor laugh.
You had your foot off of the gas pedal when it comes to these podcasts, but when you had the opportunity to sit down and talk about estate planning for an hour, you decided that topic is so important, you're going to put the gas pedal back down.
That's right.
So here we are today to talk about estate
planning.
Back on
track. So I would like to introduce my friend, Douglas Coe, also known as Doug Coe. I think he prefers that.
I do. I do.
I should have cleared that before I introduced you.
There was 2 Dougs in my first grade classroom.
Okay.
And at that time, 2 Douglases. And so on the first day of class, the teacher said, Mrs. Marty, she said, all right, we've got 2 Douglases, that won't work. And she looked at me and she said, you're Doug. And to the other Douglas, she said, you can continue to be Douglas. So from that day forward, I was Doug. And it's funny when I bump into old family friends that knew me before first grade, but that haven't remained, as connected since then. So those early family friends that knew me, they still call me Douglas. And it's a funny little division of time in my personal story. So ever since first grade, I'm Doug.
All right. Doug after first grade. So Doug has 11 years of estate planning experience. He worked within another firm for 2.5 years.
Correct.
And then went on his own. I think he had another short stint with another.
Brief. Yep.
Real brief. But essentially, for the last 9 years, you've been running your own show, growing your firm. Yep. 'Cause it's a firm once you have more than one person, I think. Or maybe it's, I don't know, whatever. Yep. So you got more people now.
Yep.
What really excites me about how Doug practices estate planning is he borrows from and learned from another friend of mine who I appreciate in estate planning, Tim O'Sullivan, who really leaned into the family harmony aspects. And so Doug borrows a lot from that type of philosophy of how do we do estate planning in a way that serves the family from a harmony aspect, future generations getting along, that there's not just money to fight over, but this really actually set up well and for their good, because it's kind of like, I'm going to go check the keys to my car to my 12-year-old boy and say, hope it goes well, And that's what a lot of people do in estate planning. So we're going to talk about that today. Another thing we're going to talk about is what an independent trustee is. Mm-hmm. What's interesting is in our industry, or in the, let's say the industry where you leave your money after you die, trust companies have a natural monopoly there. And in the world of estate planning, there's not many estate planning attorneys who actually will administer a trust. But Doug has figured out this methodology from another operation out, I think, in Colorado, but basically brought it to Wichita, Kansas. And so he's growing a firm around that now, which I think is really exciting because it gives you a lot more options and autonomy in how you decide to set up who's going to manage your money once you're gone.
Absolutely.
So with that, without further ado, I'll give it over to Doug. So Doug, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you do estate planning differently than most estate planning firms?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. So in 2016, when I started Legacy Legal LLC, I was young. I was relatively inexperienced compared to, the guys that are 30, 40 years older than me that have been doing it since before I was born. And I'll with rose-colored hindsight lenses, say that I was self-aware enough at the time to know that I had to do things differently because I couldn't compete with the 100-year-old firms with massive teams and yada yada and deep expertise in areas that I didn't have. So on one hand, I needed to, from an entrepreneurial perspective, I needed to compete differently, but simultaneously, I was keenly aware of the fact that the normal way of delivering estate planning services really wasn't serving the average client very well. Sure, if your last name is Buffett or Gates or Rockefeller, the traditional model is set up pretty darn well for you. It doesn't matter how much the fees are. It doesn't matter how much effort and complexity goes into it. You want it done right. And frankly, you're a pretty sophisticated consumer of legal services if you're at that level. And all the big, excellent firms are going to be begging for your business and rolling out the red carpet. But if you're a teacher, if you're a middle class, work at a machine shop, if you are retired and on fixed income and not a multimillionaire, the traditional model is really intimidating. You call the attorney, you say, how much is this going to cost? They say, I don't know. It depends. My hourly rate's $400, $500, $600 an hour. It usually takes X many hours, but it depends. Well, if you're living off $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month or something, signing a blank check to a big fancy marble floored law firm is a pretty scary proposition. Traditionally, there's numerous holes in the normal process. So I set out to solve those problems and to build a firm that works really well for the average client. We are not set up well to service a situation where you got, hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not our practice. Our practice is for, if you're a married couple and you got less than 20 million, we're going to knock it out of the park for you. And that's most people. If you got 50 million, 100 million, I'll co-counsel, I'll help, I'll facilitate, but we're going to bring in somebody that's got a more robust business model on some of those unique topics. So that was 2016. And I'll defer to you, but when I set out, I sat down with each financial advisor I could get in front of, and I just asked the question. And for context, for those of you that don't know, financial advisors, in my opinion, they're kind of like the quarterback in this space. They know a fair bit about a whole lot of topics, and they are great at directing traffic, at helping the client figure out when it is they need to talk to a lawyer and what things don't require the assistance of a lawyer or an accountant or whatever else. So financial advisors have a really unique perspective on what's going well at estate planning firms and what's going poorly at estate planning firms. And so I sat down with each financial advisor I could get in front of, and I just asked the questions. Hey, what do you see estate planning attorneys do that is really serving your clients well? And I took notes. And then the corollary was, what are you seeing estate planning attorneys do that is really not a blessing to your clients? Where are they dropping the ball? What are the things that clients can't stand about the normal estate planning process? And again, I took really good notes. And so we built a firm that is the heart of it is to do the things that that matter really well, and to avoid the things that are the frustrations and the friction points for the clients and the other providers around the client. So that was kind of the beginning.
All right. So how do you do estate planning today?
It is always changing. So one of the things that we really did differently starting in 2016 was we leaned heavily on technology and automation. I think the market has begun to catch up on a lot of those topics. And so in 2016, as far as I could figure out, we were the only firm in town that actually did flat fees, and that was using a robust document automation service. And those two things combined were able to produce really predictable results and experiences for the clients. So today, when a client calls and says, "Hey, I need a trust, I need an estate plan. How much is it going to cost?" The way we answer that is, "Hey, I don't know." And the reason is because every family situation is different. Family values are different, goals are different, of course, assets are different, variables are different. And what makes sense for your family may or may not make any sense for mine. If we have different goals, if we have different life experiences that are going to inform our perspectives, all of that is very relevant to what exactly needs to be in the estate plan and how are we going to put it together. So we want to get to know the client. We want to get to know their situation and what their values are, what their goals are, what their fears are, what are the different variables. And some of that's in conjunction with a financial advisor. So if the advisor's putting together some pieces for long-term care insurance, for example, that likely is relevant to the estate planning process. Once we do that get to know you process, we then can have a really concrete and informed conversation about what type of planning strategies ought to be implemented. If there's options, we give the client options and we explain the advantages and disadvantages. And our goal is to educate the client and empower the client to make their own informed decision as to what it is we're going to do for them. And as part of that conversation is a non-negotiable black and white commitment to what the price is going to be. I will tell the client how much the price is going to be for these services. We don't change the price. It's in writing, and so from the very beginning, the clients know exactly what they're getting. They know how much it's going to cost, and they know what to expect. They know how long the process is going to take, and our goal is to eliminate every single point of friction that might pop up through the process.
Okay. So, what's your ideal outcome? Like for you, if this is how estate planning, if this is the end result of estate planning, you feel like you have had huge success for a client.
Go ahead.
And also, if you have any stories that speak to, here's how I've seen it go really well, and here's how I've seen it go not so well.
Yeah. I think the ideal end result is when my clients, my estate planning clients, from the grave or from heaven or from whatever your worldview is, from the afterlife, clients look back at the surviving family and they are thrilled to see that their wishes were honored, their goals were accomplished. And then simultaneously, the surviving family members have a greater appreciation for what mom and dad put into place. They have a increased respect for the proactive planning that mom and dad did. They have further solidified family harmony. Family is closer, and assets are used in a beneficial way. Asset values are maximized. At the onset, you mentioned this idea of the parable of the talents, where there's the three different servants. The good and faithful servants grew what they were entrusted with. And ancient text also talks about, look, it's not just about your assets during your lifetime. It's actually a wise man leaves an inheritance to his children's children's children. It's a multi-generational thing. And so if three generations down the road, the family assets are zeroed out, I would suggest that as a family, as a patriarch of a family, you've not been a faithful servant. So if the goal is to be a faithful servant, not just during lifetime, but in terms of the family that survives you, how can we make sure that the assets are used wisely and productively well after you're gone? So that ideal goal, home run, excellent end result of estate planning it's the results long after mom and dad are gone, and it's what's happening in the next generations. But hugely relevant is, what are the family's goals? What are the client's goals? If the client's goal is give it all away and force my kids to make their own way in life, well, that's kind of easy to do from an estate planning perspective, and we can check that box. Cool. When you die, give it all to the church. It's done. Now we gotta make that happen legally, but that's an easy thing to accomplish. And so, no, that wealth did not survive to the third generation within the family because the goal was to give it away. So the clients have to set the parameters. The clients have to set the goals of what is and what is not a successful estate plan.
Okay. So how do you account for wealth beyond the balance sheet in a family within an estate plan?
Love that question. So we have two starting philosophies that we bring to the planning process and that we articulate to each one of our new estate planning clients. The first goal is that net worth is far more than the dollars and cents. The money is important. That's the balance sheet stuff, but it is not the only piece of wealth broadly defined. There's family harmony. There's values. There's relationships. There's faith. There's work ethic. There's generosity. All of these things are under the broad umbrella of wealth from my perspective. And so if we successfully transfer money to the next generation, we avoid taxes, we stay out of court, whatever. But we do it in such a way where we mess up family harmony. It's not a successful estate plan. It's a failed estate plan, in my opinion. And related to that is the second philosophy. It's that money is like dynamite. It's an awesome, powerful tool. However, too much at the wrong time or in the wrong hands can be a problem. The Vanderbilts, the Cornelius Vanderbilt, famous for many reasons, but in the estate planning world, there's some powerful lessons to be learned there. I'm no historian, but Vanderbilt built this massive business or series of businesses that created tremendous value to the world. And at the time of his passing, I think 1877, his net worth was something like $200 billion in today's money, just a massive fortune, the largest fortune the world had ever seen at that time. Well, 100 years later, 1977, there was a Vanderbilt family reunion, and as the story goes, that at that time, there was not a single millionaire left in the Vanderbilt family tree. Had we just taken the money and put it under a rock, like frankly, the unfaithful servant, there would have been countless millionaires still, even with inflation. Sure. If we would have taken that relatively foolish approach. If we would have just put it under a rock, we would have been better off. But because money is like dynamite, the money actually can be detrimental if not stewarded properly. So wealth is far more than just what shows up on the balance sheet. It's really what are the things that matter most to the clients. If you asked clients, if you said, all right, look, you've got 4 different categories. You have financial wealth, you have relationships, you have work ethic, and you have whether it's faith or values or whatever, your philosophy. If you had, those are the 4 different categories. You could transfer 3 to your kids, but not all 4. Which 3 would you transfer? Most of my clients would say it's the work ethic, it's the relationships, it's the faith or the philosophy and the values. Because if they have those three things, first of all, the money, a lot of my clients would say the money really doesn't matter relative to those more important goals. But then a lot of my clients would also say the money would come. If you have the work ethic and the values and the relationships, the money will come. And if you don't have the values, the relationships, the work ethic, the faith, or the philosophy, the money will disappear. It will be used improperly, and it will not be a blessing. So of those three different categories of wealth, for most of my clients, the balance sheet wealth is actually the least important.
Yeah. I guess I'm not real familiar with what caused the Vanderbilts to delete all the money somehow. But I guess, do you know more of the story of what the subsequent generations did, or did they make poor decisions with the business itself, or just overspent what they had because they didn't know, they didn't have a concept of that kind of wealth?
You know, I couldn't really, I could only speculate. So I'm no Vanderbilt historian, but I'll give you two thoughts on that. The first one is Warren Buffett says it really well, and I know we'll come back to this, but I think Tim mentions it on his podcast here that he did with you. But Warren Buffett says he wants to leave his kids enough money that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. And so say that again. He wants to leave his kids enough money that they can do anything that they choose to do, but not so much money that they can choose to do nothing.
Right.
And I think in the case of the Vanderbilts, in hindsight, they were given enough money that they could do nothing.
Absolutely.
And that is not a blessing. The other thing I will say is it's not just, well, what went wrong with the Vanderbilts? The reality is accumulated wealth almost never lasts beyond the third generation. If you looked at 100 families where in generation one, there's a self-made multimillionaire. If you trace those families, each one of them 3 generations down the way, very, very, very few of those fortunes would be intact by the time you got to the 4th generation. This is a generalization, but they say an overgeneralization. They say that those that work with family wealth transferring, they say that generation 1 creates the wealth, generation 2 preserves or maintains the wealth, and then generation 3 blows the wealth. Because there's enough of a disconnect between grandpa, who built the thing from the ground up, and grandkid, who grew up in a wealthy, privileged environment where money was never an issue. Generation 3 has no memory of what it's like to swipe the card at the grocery store and get it declined for insufficient funds.
Right.
That's not their experience. Generation 2 probably grew up as a child with pretty scarce resources. It wasn't until Generation 2 has left the house where Generation 1 really gets to that extreme wealth situation. So Generation 2 still has a wise perspective. They've got a framework for, hey, where did this thing come from? It wasn't always here. I know what it's like to be hungry. I remember when I was a kid, we didn't have money for a backpack. Generation 2 has that experience. Generation 3 does not. And so there's stereotypically and generally, with a broad brush there, Generation 3 lacks the wisdom and perspective and experience to steward the money well.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm actually grateful that my kids have lived with me through a season where we lived in a duplex at one point.
Yeah.
For about a year. That's
wisdom and perspective that comes from that.
Yeah. And for a family that has money, they have no reason to live in a duplex.
Right.
It's not there. But the things that you learn, you hone when you're growing your own business, when you have to figure it out over a long period of time, that's muscles that's built. And if you're handing it off to someone that doesn't have it, or even you use the term massive wealth, but But really, more specifically, it's one category of it. It's a massive balance sheet.
Sure.
So not necessarily holistic wealth.
Great point. Right.
But let's pivot though to what you're doing in the estate planning space. Aside from you've created a process where you're curious, you show up just like you did with other financial advisors to learn, hey, from your perspective, what's working well and what's not in estate planning, so that I can build a practice that's going to last for decades to come. And you're doing that now with the clients, coming at it with curiosity and not predefined formulas or, you don't have it all figured out, which is extremely powerful no matter what context of life we're talking about. On top of that, you have figured out the independent trustee. So, and frankly, I want to see you grow your practice more so that we can have more of that and have more options for folks who have grown their balance sheet well and they want high quality help and a lot of autonomy in how it's administered and their wishes are carried out. So why don't you speak to the story behind independent trustee, what that looks like, and how that experience might be different than say what somebody could get at a trust company, which is kind of the normal place that you'd leave money once you're dead. Because unless, for example, here it's steward right, unless I have a management agreement that is actually with the trust, or the trust is named in it, that becomes the client once the client passes away. As soon as they die, my relationship with them ends because it was legally with them. They're dead. I can't manage their account anymore. In fact, that's really not that great of a thing because, which is why I really like your model, because if I have to just stop managing their money and we're using an active approach, not that I'm saying we have fundamentally good stocks in the portfolios, but still, you want to be able to continue the active management until you decisively say, no, we're going to go passive now. But okay. Anyway, so that's a lot, but why don't you tell us about the backstory, how it's different, how it works, what that experience is like?
Yeah. So, and bear with me, I'm going to give you a long warm up, before I take a swing at that. So, before we even get to the conversation about who ought to be the trustee once mom and dad are gone, there's kind of some structural mistakes that whether it's clients making through the process or the traditional law firm model, traditional estate planning process, that it's really going to set the client up for failure. And so let me first talk about some of those mistakes, how to avoid them, a different approach, and then from that's going to lead to that follow-up topic of, okay, but then in the context of independent trustee, or who's going to be the trustee, how do we navigate that? So one of the fundamental mistakes that that negatively impacts the client so much is failing to identify the real issue. So we'll have clients all the time that say, hey, need to come in, need to get a trust. And, well, maybe that, I would suggest that is a legal conclusion that client has made. I think there's an underlying desire or fear or goal that's not yet been articulated, that's not yet been analyzed. And so if as a lawyer, we say, great, fantastic, we do trusts all the time, we'll knock it out of the park for you, come on in, let's do a trust, and we do a trust, well, that may or may not be the right tool. It's a little bit like, your car is leaking oil. You take it to the repair shop and you say, hey, I've got a bad oil filter. I need the oil filter replaced. Well, the mechanic, he'll replace your oil filter for you, but you go home, your car's still leaking oil. That customer, that car owner, made an assumption about what is the solution to the problem, and that customer bypassed the advice of the mechanic that actually knows how to diagnose the leak. So you go home with a brand new oil filter, but your car's still leaking. Problem not solved. So what I would invite a client to consider, or what I would suggest to the listeners, is start with the goals, the desires, the fears. So, hey, when I die, I want to make sure my wishes are honored, that my goals are accomplished. Well, that's a totally different conversation than I want a trust. Well, why do you want a trust? Well, my dad had a trust. He always told me that you got to have a trust. Or my buddies at the country club, they all went to an attorney and they all have trusts. Or, you know, when I look at the property records for my neighborhood, I see that most of my fancy neighbors have trusts. And so there's this assumption that a trust is the proper tool.
How many people are looking at the property records?
I've had multiple clients say that to me.
Really?
No joke.
That's funny.
No joke.
Huh.
Or you know, it's the physician who has 10 partners and they just updated all the business ownership documents and they see that 6 of their 10 partners own their shares in the real estate, the business real estate, as trustee of their trust. So then the young physician starts to feel a little insecure. Oh man, maybe I need a trust. Everyone else has trusts. Well, that might be the right tool, but it might not be. And there's an education process there of, hey, it might be the right tool, but it might be for reasons different than the ones you're thinking. You know, you might need an oil filter. You might also need a gasket. You might also need some other little hose or belt. So the clients that come in with a posture of, hey, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what I need. I just want to make sure everything goes well. That posture, 100% of the time, produces better end results for that family than the alternative, which is the clients that call and they say, hey, this is what I need. I know what I want, and don't try to sell me anything else. And you can tell immediately once you start the conversation with the client which of those two camps they're coming from. So as an advisor, it's tricky to honor the requests and expectations of the client, but also try to help educate, help kind of redirect or steer. It's a little bit like a car salesman. So family goes down to the car lot on a Saturday morning. The wife and the kids, they show up, and the husband walks straight up to the car salesman and says, hey, I need a Corvette. There's 2 types of car salesmen. The first type says, fantastic, Corvettes are awesome. We've got some great Corvettes on the back of the lot. By the way, this podcast is not sponsored by Chevrolet, but I would imagine if Chevrolet wanted to sponsor this podcast, sponsorship opportunities are available. So Corvette, yeah, sure, no problem. So car salesman says, fantastic, we've got some awesome Corvettes. Let's go. I'll show you the Corvettes. I'll sell you a Corvette. Fantastic. Well, that car salesman has met that client's expectations. That car salesman has done what the client has asked. That car salesman did not sell the client something that the client didn't want. Maybe, sort of, kind of. Here's the other response. It's the type A, well-educated male in my stereotype that walks up to the car lot and says, I want a Corvette, and don't pull a fast one on me. Don't give me some used car salesman tricks. I know what I want. I want a Corvette. That a good car salesman, in my opinion, has a really hard task. On one hand, the car salesman needs to honor and respect the very clear wishes that have been articulated. But on the other hand, there's a chance there's something that customer doesn't fully understand. So in my opinion, the good car salesman says, hey, fantastic, that's great. We've got some awesome Corvettes on the back of the lot. Would love to show those to you. And hey, as we're walking towards the Corvettes, tell me a little bit more about what's going on. What are you thinking? What are you going to use the Corvette for? Well, customer says, oh yeah, we need a car to take the kids to soccer practice and running errands, and when we do carpool and stuff, we just need a good, reliable, well-respected vehicle to make sure we've got a reliable transportation for the family. And the good car salesman says, oh, that's cool. So how'd you hear about Corvettes? He says, well, everyone in my neighborhood says Corvettes are the best, and my dad always loved Corvettes. And so, frankly, I don't know too much about them, but I'm told that Corvettes are fantastic. Well, the good car salesman says, hey, that absolutely is true. Corvettes are great. But as we're walking towards the Corvettes, could I have 30 seconds? I just want to show you this thing called a minivan. From what you're saying, I think there's at least a chance that it might be worth considering. As we're walking to the Corvettes, could I give you a 30-second glimpse into what a minivan might do for you? Well, I think most customers in that situation would say, well, sure, I'll take a look at a minivan, but I've never heard of a minivan before. Well, with the 4 kids and the husband and the wife, the Corvette's a bad choice for their goals. The Corvette is not the right tool for the client's goals, which is, in this case, taking the kids to soccer practice and running errands and yada, yada. And so while a Corvette might be a fantastic tool in some circumstances, it's not for this specific one. But the good car salesman has to lead the client in a shift of their thinking. It's the same thing with estate planning. So the client calls and says, I want a trust. Well, maybe they do. But what they're probably really trying to say is, I want to make sure my wishes are honored. I want to make sure my assets stay out of court. I want to make sure that my kids don't fight. I want to make sure we don't pay any unnecessary taxes. Those are really the goals, and they're jumping to the conclusion that a trust is the correct tool.
Right. So if someone walks in with a conclusion that they love Corvettes, they want Corvettes, Corvettes are fast, Corvettes get looked at, Corvettes get you the girl, so to speak, or whatever your attention you're looking for, but really they need a minivan or they need a work truck.
Correct.
It's a disservice to give them exactly what they want because maybe they don't understand the whole picture and how it works.
Correct.
Okay.
And it applies to, I would imagine, any professional service space or even any industry. So if a client walks into your office, Michael, and says, hey, I'm retiring, I'm going to roll my 401k over, and I'm going to put it in an IRA, and I want it to be an IRA annuity. Well, they have reached a conclusion of what is the best way to accomplish their financial goals. And they have completely skipped over the process that you would provide, which is advising, counseling, educating. And maybe that's the right call, maybe, but maybe not.
Rarely.
And maybe that's a small piece of the puzzle.
Sure.
And, or the client walks in and says, hey, I need $1 million of XYZ stock. Well, maybe, but why?
Yeah.
And there could be a good reason for it, but my gosh, let's make sure we've considered the risks of putting all of our eggs in this one basket. So there's an advice component here that is critical.
Right. So professional services, advice, professional advice versus just a salesman.
Right.
So make the sale, get the commission, go home.
Right. So I could stay extremely busy if all I did was draft documents for people that wanted documents.
Maybe we should work on your business planning then.
So, documents, I would say that for us at Legacy Legal, philosophically, the documents are free. It's the advice that clients are paying for. And then secondarily, perhaps it's the service or the peace of mind, but it's the advice and the strategy.
Sure.
So, you can go online and get a free document called a trust. Will it accomplish your goals? Probably not. There's a related component here, another mistake, which is viewing estate planning as kind of a one and done thing, like a check the box thing. It's, oh yeah, I did my estate plan 10 years ago. We're good to go. Well, maybe, but if it's been a decade, probably not. Things change. Assets change. Wishes change. Laws change. Family dynamics change. Worldviews change. And, it's not that an entire estate plan has to be rewritten on a regular basis, but There's fine tuning. There's little tweaks that almost invariably have to be made somewhere in the plan, not necessarily in a document that we do. But if you did your estate plan 5 years ago and 3 years ago you got a new vehicle, there needs to be some analysis of how did you take title to that vehicle and what have you done regarding that asset in the context of estate planning and probate avoidance. And it is an extremely rare client that is able to successfully stay on top of all of those topics. And financial advisors are fantastic. I'm a huge believer in the services you guys provide, but it is an extremely, extremely, extremely rare financial advisor that is getting into such minutia as, oh, there's a new $100 checking account down at the new bank. How's it titled? What are the beneficiary designations? Is that in the trust? Oh, the new vehicle, yada, yada. That is usually doesn't quite make it to the annual checkup agenda.
People forget.
I mean, heck, I've got multiple financial advisor clients whose stuff is not currently in order, and I know it, and I've mentioned it, and it's just not the priority to stay on top of it. So if you view an estate plan as something that I will do at some point in time, or something that I did at some point in time in the past, and then it's done, and I put the binder on the shelf, that is a strategy for disaster down the road.
Sure. It's almost like just a different way of thinking. Kind of like when you have a business, you operate the business as the business. You put assets into it, you take assets out of it. There's maintenance that occurs. You keep the books up. You employ people such as an estate planning attorney, whatever. But in the context of a trust, it's just it's a new way of thinking about if you do have a trust or estate plan. Okay, not making the conclusion that trust is the right thing. But the estate plan itself, you have to conduct yourself moving forward that this is how we're doing it.
Yeah.
So that you don't have the one-off thing that, oh, we're back in probate again.
Right.
Dang it.
And it's once you have a plan in place, it is almost all of the time, it's extremely easy to keep it current and maintained. It is no harder to properly take title to the new vehicle than to improperly take title to the vehicle in light of estate planning goals. It just has to be done. It's easy to do. It's also easy to not do. So, if you have a trust, if with your advisor, with your estate planning attorney, and through the educational process, if you conclude that a trust is the right tool, and often it is, the trust does absolutely nothing unless it's used properly. I don't care how beautifully written the trust document is, if assets are not properly addressed, both at the initial planning stage, but then also at any point and every point in time in the future, then the trust is irrelevant regarding those assets until we use some other mechanisms to try to problem solve. So having assets in the trust is absolutely critically important. More on that perhaps another time. Now, let's get back to your question on the topic of an independent trustee.
All right. So let me tee it up a little bit again. Actually, let's take a short break.
Okay.
All right, that's a short break. So we're at 55 minutes. As far as time management goes,
I'm good.
Well, I think I'm good too, but
Let's look.
Yeah, so I think I'm good until like 2. I don't want to take that long, but on whatever if you're able to shorten up the stories a little bit, because if we really belabor a point, people are just gonna glaze over. They're gonna tune out. So if you can do that, I think that would help. Also to help on the time management side.
Okay.
So I'm trying to sum up your points so that if we do cut it out. Or if it makes for a short clip, I'm trying to make it to where it can be succinct and be like, okay. And the other reason for teeing up a question or teeing up a topic is I can ask you the question and then you say it.
Cool.
So it gets the context in there together.
Cool.
Just as far as management goes.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Okay.
And do you want me to give shorter answers that you, just as a general matter, so that you can chime in more questions?
I think that would be good.
Okay.
Because then I have to like cut you off to direct it a certain way.
Okay.
So just like, think like, okay, how can if you can, if you're able to condense it a little bit, and then we can play a little more ping pong.
Cool. Let's do it.
All right. Cool. And we're back. So thanks, Doug, for sharing about your practice. And we were just getting into talking about the independent trustee role. So independent trustee, the context is it's a attorney who can help administer the wishes of your trust once you're gone, especially, maybe even while you're living, but I'll let you speak to that. So what's it look like to have an independent trustee?
An independent trustee is a particular type of neutral third-party professional trustee. So if you haven't yet, I would recommend you listen to the Tim O'Sullivan interview that you did, I think maybe last year, for the listeners out there. Some really good stuff in that podcast. I've got a ton of respect for Tim. I agree with his perspective on having a corporate trustee, a trustee that is not the oldest kid or the one that one time you worked at a bank. So an independent trustee is a particular type of trustee that I would put as a subcategory of corporate trustee.
Okay. Nice. So so there's a subcategory of corporate. I totally agree with that. I've told my own family, I do not want to be the trustee for the family. I do not need an additional job. I do not need to be at the center of family controversy. If I'm doing something that the trust tells me to do and someone else doesn't like it, like, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the one at Christmas or Thanksgiving that's taking heat because someone didn't like it.
Yeah.
To say the least. So talk more about what that's like, as far as and just reiterate. I mean, you don't have to go back and listen to it. You know the stuff, or you know the philosophy. What does an independent trustee do to preserve family harmony? What's that? Maybe it's better just to explain, if you made a family member a trustee, what you're really asking them to do.
Yeah. So I would say there's three options when you're selecting a trustee. One is friends and family, the other is a big bank, and the third is an independent trustee. When you pick friends and family, it is, like Tim says, there's a massive risk to family harmony. So doing the job well requires integrity. It requires intelligence. It requires diligence. It requires experience. And there's things you just don't know about serving as a trustee. So here's a silly little example. Within 60 days of stepping into the role of trustee under the Uniform Trust Code, the trustee has to send a letter to all of the beneficiaries disclosing a certain set of information. Well, you don't know that just because you have integrity.
Even know that.
Right? That's not a question of integrity. That's a question of, do you or do you not know that particular statute exists? And if you don't send the letter, you've breached your duties as a fiduciary.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, you can find yourself in really hot water. It's experience. So I tell clients all the time, look, I could probably, we got a wooden table here that we're sitting at. I have the intelligence and the integrity to be a woodworker and make wooden conference room tables. I'd like to think I could do it pretty well. I'll bet you my 10th table would be better than my first because I don't have the experience, and experience matters. Could I build a table on day one? Yeah. If I watched enough YouTube videos and talked to enough people that had done it before and, Googled it and figured it out, I bet I could build a table. but experience matters so much. It's the same thing as being a trustee. So we'll have a client come in. They say, "Hey, Dad just passed away. I'm the trustee. What am I supposed to do?" First thing I'll say is, don't serve. If you can not serve and have the big bank do it, that's the backup. That's what I would recommend. I've never had a client go through the process of serving as a trustee where at the end of the process they say, "Oh, that wasn't too bad. Like, that was kind of great. Privileged to have had the opportunity."
Make me your trustee. That's a
Right.
line I've never heard.
Right.
Oh, I'd love to do it. I've done it before.
So, yeah. And in fact, when mom and dad are worried that they're going to offend Johnny if Johnny's not the trustee, what I say is, look, if Johnny wants to be the trustee, either he has absolutely no idea what he's talking about or he's trying to steal some money. Those are the only two reasons somebody would want to be a trustee unless it's their profession.
Yeah.
So
it's a real job.
It is. So it's a massive headache. Doing it well is tricky. And if you came to me and you said, "Hey, Doug, I'm going on vacation. I've got $1 million cash. Can you keep it safe for me? And if I come back and if there's $1 missing, there's going to be massive consequences."
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, there's all these other people that are going to be wanting this money while I'm gone. And some of them may have a right to it. Some of them may not. And I can't fully articulate all of the things that may come up. But if you screw it up, there's massive financial consequences, Doug, and potentially jail time. And there's going to be a lot of people that have expectations that are not informed and that are incongruent with somebody else's expectations. Mm-hmm. But here's the $1 million cash. I'll be back at some point. My gosh, that's a responsibility that I absolutely do not want unless it's my business to provide those services.
Right.
That is a massive liability, a massive risk, a massive headache. And there's almost no way where it's going to go well. Because if I distribute money to Johnny, he's happy, but Jane is angry. If I distribute money to Jane and not Johnny, Johnny's angry. If I don't distribute to anybody, everybody's angry. If I distribute to everyone, then, when you come back from your vacation, you're angry. And
you're signing up for so if there's any difference of the people that may stand to benefit from somebody's estate, you're signing up to be the face of disappointment.
Well said.
And yeah, on top of that, it's kind of like, if you, and this is maybe a role that more people can identify with, is taking care or being, if nothing else, around a very advanced late life stage person. So when you're within 6 months of dying and you know it, your health's declining. But there comes a point, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, whatever it is. I've had it in my family where there's a point where taking care of them is a full-time responsibility.
Sure.
And at the same time, it's like, okay, there's a difference between showing up for a little bit and saying hi and visiting and being their caretaker 24/7.
Yep.
So, and in that case, and then the stewardship of the actual estate, the administrating the trust, they're not even around. Even if they could weigh in a little bit and their health's failing, they're not around at all anymore.
Right.
All you got to go off is the document. And so if there's any deviation from what people really want and what they were expecting, you're the face of it.
Right.
You got to deal with it.
Yep, absolutely. So the other thing we see is, so when I started, there was two options for a trustee. There's friends and family, and then there's big bank. And friends and family is almost always, at the end result, it's a negative. It's not a win most of the time. It can work. But 40-50% of the time it destroys or erodes family harmony, and it's never a perk or a privilege to be a trustee. It is a chore, a duty, a headache, a responsibility. So as one option. The other option is big bank. And if you don't have, towards $1 million per trust share, most banks don't want to serve. So if you're a family with $500,000 and 2 kids, almost no professional corporate bank trust departments will take that trust on to serve. You have to have more money. There's minimums for trust companies to step in and serve. Mm-hmm. There's a whole lot of people that don't have $1 million per kid to leave. So that's one challenge with the corporate trustee option. The other challenge is their fees at the end of the day are relatively high. Not as high as the cost of litigation if the kids are fighting, but it is.
Well, it's worth it,
right? It can be expensive. Mm-hmm. But the real challenge I see when it comes to naming a big bank for the average client is that the average client has perhaps a multiple decade experience and relationship with a financial advisor who, like I said, is the quarterback.
Right.
And if we name the big bank as the trustee, then the moment mom and dad are gone, the assets leave the financial advisor's office, which, regardless of the fact that that's a negative to the financial advisor and their business, the real negative is that the quarterback that's been on the field for the first 4 quarters of the game gets benched in overtime. If the clients wanted their money to be managed by the big bank, then they would have been using the big bank as the financial advisor for all of those years. The big bank was not in the trenches with mom and dad over the years or the decades in which the wealth was being built and stewarded properly. The big bank has dramatically less perspective on the family dynamics and what would mom or dad say about this thing that has come up? Is this an appropriate distribution? What are the family values when it comes to stewardship of resources? The financial advisor, a good one, has perspective on all of those things that's been accumulated over the years of walking with those clients. Mm-hmm. It's the worst possible moment in time to bench that financial advisor is the transition to the second generation. So when you name the big bank, while you may be taking an excellent step towards preservation of family harmony, there's some huge drawbacks. One can be expense. The other is you lose the benefit of the financial advisor being on the team still.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. Part of the problem is the relationship that's been built, and a lot of times advisory relationships, especially really tight ones, I know a whole lot about, I would say a good portion of my clients. Some clients, admittedly, maybe played a little close to the vest. We just don't we don't get as much face time. But I would say, especially my best and closest clients, I know a lot about mm-hmm. how they got where they're at. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot about how they feel about their family, how they love them, how they're trying to take care of them, their appreciation for the nuance of personality and behaviors of their family. Like, there's so much data you wind up picking up over the years within the family system of the client that's useful. And it's not that all of a sudden I should be the trustee. I don't want to be the trustee, but at least if I can offer perspective from what mom and dad left, that's really cool. I'd love to be able to do that years down the road. And the other thing is there's going to be some succession 30, 40 years from now, even within those that I serve. There'll be other advisors come in and out. But the bottom line is you don't want to totally just do a hard reset on a relationship in that kind of a transition, because you got the trauma of the deceased for the family, which is one whole thing. And then you've got a totally new relationship, and they may decide to manage that money completely different than how mm-hmm. it was grown to where it got to. Mm-hmm. Because it's compliant and it's safe, maybe, right. And it reduces their business risk.
Well, and the new institution that steps in place of the financial advisor likely will not have the ability to make any type of values-based decisions. And they, even if they could, they don't know what the family values are or were. Mm-hmm. So the role of the financial advisor, not only during the client's lifetime, but afterwards, is critically important from my perspective. So I would be initially, and the way I was trained is, you gave the clients the two options. Is it friends and family or is it big bank? And as I was educating my clients on those two options, there was this like awkward, obvious reality, which is, well, neither of those two options seem very good. And I agreed. So I started, again, went back to all the financial advisors I could connect with, and I just started asking the question, hey guys, what are you seeing that works really well in the trustee space? Are there trustees that are keeping the assets with you as the advisor? And are there trustees that are wanting to have an ongoing collaborative experience with you as the financial advisor for the benefit of the family? And I probably talked to 20 different advisors. There was only one that had a good answer for me. 19 out of 20 said, yeah, there's no good option. There's one that said, hey, actually, there's a group out of Colorado Springs that are knocking it out of the park. So immediately I got excited and started looking closely at that group.
And
for quite some time, I was offering that Colorado Springs company as a third option, and philosophically and kind of intellectually made a ton of sense. But my clients kept saying, well, yeah, but why Colorado Springs? I don't have any relationship or connection to Colorado Springs.
Yeah. Can you do it, Doug?
And after enough of those questions right there of, can you do it, Doug? I finally said, well, yeah, but I did it with some hesitancy. And again, if you haven't yet, I would recommend you listen to the Tim O'Sullivan podcast that was done with Mike. There's some really good stuff in there. And he makes some great points on, historically, when attorneys have stepped into the role of trustee, there are problems. Mm-hmm. So again, like from the very beginning of Legacy Legal, I said, all right, if we're going to step into this space of serving as a trustee, where are the areas where it goes poorly? Where are the places in which this approach will produce bad results? And how can we put guardrails up to make sure that doesn't happen? So, for example, there are stories. I've had clients in my office, tears of anger from an experience they'd had at another firm where the attorney was the trustee, and after mom and dad died, the trustee hires himself as the attorney to do a bunch of legal work. And then the attorney sends to himself as trustee the invoice. And then the trustee pays the invoice out of trust assets to himself as the attorney. And before
that feels like too many hats for one person.
It at least can appear to be something of a conflict of interest. Whether it is or not, I don't know. I think in some cases there's legitimate work that needs to be done, and the client may or may not understand why the work was done. But at the end of the day, we've had clients sitting in my conference room, truly, actually, literally, tears of anger, feeling so taken advantage of from a dynamic in which the attorney was the trustee and the trustee was the attorney.
What about trust protector?
Trust protector plays a critical role, as do other guardrails. So when we are drafting an estate plan.
So I heard you right. You said critical role as a trust protector. So if you're the attorney, the trustee, and the trust protector, is that good?
Not from my perspective most of the time.
Okay.
There may be a time and a place for that. The way we do it is
all right, let's talk about that.
If we are going to be the estate planning attorney, and if the clients are going to name us as the trustee, we'll insist that there is a separate trust protector.
What do they do?
A trust protector does nothing unless something needs to be done. And specifically, their power is to fire the trustee. There's a couple other kind of administrative, legal, technical things that they have the power to do also. But when a client is selecting us as trustee, I will insist there's a trust protector, and it's the trust protector's job to fire us for whatever reason. So they have the power to fire us if it is Wednesday and it's sunny outside. They have the power to fire us if our fees are inappropriate. They have the power to fire us if we're making wrong judgment calls. They have the power to fire us if we smell bad. They have an unlimited power to replace us. That creates an incredibly important guardrail or a system of checks and balances. There's another guardrail, which is when we're serving as trustee, we don't do billable legal work for the trust.
Okay.
If mom and dad selected us as trustee, and if mom and dad are gone, and while we're administering the trust, there is a need for legal services that someone needs to perform these services and somebody ought to get paid for it. Great. We're not hiring ourselves. We're going to go hire another firm to represent the trust to provide those legal services.
Yeah, I think that's smart.
And so if the other firm charges $1,000 for the thing, the trust pays the other firm the $1,000, but it is very different than us doing the work and us giving ourselves the $1,000 of revenue.
Right.
And even if we did the exact same work and it was absolutely necessary, at best it looks bad.
At best, it should be questioned.
At best, and in the experience of a lot of my clients, they sure feel taken advantage of when they find out that the trustee also did some legal work and paid themselves out of trust funds for this legal work that the beneficiaries knew nothing about, and the trustee unilaterally hired themselves to do some legal work. So we just don't do it. That's a clear and simple guardrail that helps keep us on track. Again, the trust protector plays a critical role. The other thing that's the way we do it is we start with the strong assumption that the financial advisor that's serving the client will be the financial advisor that's serving the trustee, serving the trust. So if, in this case, if clients have their assets with you or with whoever financial advisor, as trustee, when we step in, we're going to keep the money there. We're going to continue using that financial advisor. So now you've got three pieces to the solution. There's the independent trustee, there's the trust protector, and there's the financial advisor.
And the client can always change financial advisors.
Correct.
They always can. It's not like that's off the table. In fact, I think that's one of the strong points is that you're not. It doesn't get steered directly to a certain trust company, and then it's really difficult to even move it from that. Correct.
So it's whoever the financial advisor is at the time clients pass away, and at the time in which independent trustee steps in. The starting assumption is it's that financial advisor that will be the advisor to the trust as well. And, so long as they're doing their job and still in business and yada, yada. But what happens then is you've got a three-legged stool.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the trustee, the trust protector, the financial advisor. If the trustee isn't doing their job well, the trust protector has the power to fire the trustee. If the financial advisor, who's still at the table, is concerned about how the trustee is doing their job, for one, hopefully the financial advisor and the trustee can just have a conversation and sort it out, or clarify, or pivot. But if that doesn't solve the problem, then it's real easy. The financial advisor calls the trust protector, says, "Hey, I'm concerned about how the independent trustee is serving the trust. We spoke. Doesn't seem like there's a workable solution. And I'll be frank. I think you need to find a different trustee." Well, the trust protector can very quickly, easily, simply find a new trustee. That is a very powerful guardrail. Compared to if everything is all under the same trust department at the bank, the wealth is managed there, the distribution provisions are managed there, and there's not a trust protector. If something isn't going really well in that trust administration, it's really hard, first of all, to identify it, and second of all, to address it. because the checks and balances just aren't there in the same way.
Right. Yeah. You don't have the outside advisor. It's a lot of times it could be a trust officer, or it could just be an employee of the trust company.
Right. Or a committee.
Or yeah. Right. So, it's all in house. Right. So it's hard. It is hard to have that objective look. Right. And with a three-legged stool, you get it from three different parties. One is likely an interested party on behalf of the beneficiaries, if not one themselves. Two is the attorney, who has professional duties in ethical guidelines, ethical accountability. Then you've got an advisor, hopefully a full fiduciary advisor, maybe with an RIA firm, maybe with a name that rhymes with Kluward Bright.
Yes, Kluward Bright.
I tried to. That wasn't very. I'll have to work on something that rhymes with that a little better. But regardless, you've got three-legged stool versus it's kind of in an echo chamber,
right?
Because their philosophy and their culture is going to dictate how they self-judge.
Right.
You want the diversity. You want the additional eyeballs.
Right. There's also on an increasing basis, there are tricky value-based decisions that trustees are having to make. Mm-hmm. And I think it's only going to become more and more complicated.
Yeah.
So here's an example. Normal trust language would allow for distributions out of the trust to pay for health expenses.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, okay. Health expenses 50 years ago were probably a little bit less values-based, a little bit less political, a little bit less complicated. It's do we or do we not have a broken leg? If broken, then fix. All right? Well, it's 2024, and there are complicated questions like gender identity. There are potentially polarizing topics like elective, aesthetic, medical procedures. Mm-hmm. So, a question I pose is, well, what happens if the beneficiary, who's entitled to receive distributions for healthcare expenses, mom and dad have been gone for a decade, beneficiary calls up the trustee and says, hey, I need $100,000 for gender-conforming surgery. That is a landmine to navigate.
Right.
If you are big bank and you say no, am I going to get sued now for some sort of, prejudice against some alternative sexual identity request? Well, depending on how progressive I am as a bank, I don't want to be labeled as bigoted against this population.
Sure.
And so we're gonna pay for, I don't care how much it costs, we're gonna pay for this gender conforming surgery. Meanwhile, mom and dad are rolling over in their graves. And it's not something that can just be articulated in the documents because we don't have a crystal ball. These are values, these are judgment calls. And
in 20 or 30 years, there's going to be options that we could have never dreamed of having that may not be a values aligned option. But the values are difficult to implement.
Yep. Here's one where, let's say, and this is a bit crass, intentionally, but what I share with clients, I say, all right, so you're gone, your daughter hits 18, on her 18th birthday, she calls up the trustee and says, hey, I need $100,000 for breast augmentation. And I kind of gauge the client's perspective.
Seems a little high.
Does it?
I wouldn't really know.
It's an excellent
feels
provider.
A little high.
Excellent provider. And so there's a hypothetical scenario in which my clients, mom and dad say not only no, but hell no. I don't want my hard-earned money going to this procedure for an 18-year-old. There's another scenario where, well, yeah, but what if the breast augmentation was because there's been breast cancer, because there's been a mastectomy, and because the 18-year-old, bless her heart, just simply wants to be restored to how God made her? Well, now it feels different, doesn't it? If we're doing it to get more follows on Instagram, that's maybe a no. If we're doing it to be restored simply to how God created us, then maybe it's a yes. That's a values thing. That's a judgment thing. And that's where I think a good trustee, when they get that phone call from 18-year-old, first of all, a good trustee hopefully is going to ask some follow-up questions. But who knows how that specific conversation goes. A good trustee then, the way we put the trust together, is going to call the trust protector. And quite likely the financial advisor as well. Like, hey, I'm getting this call, 18-year-old saying she needs this breast augmentation. And she told me that it's because she had breast cancer and a mastectomy. Well, I don't know. I've not been going to her medical appointments as a trustee, but the trust protector, who likely is a close friend or family member, probably does know whether or not the cancer story is legitimate. The financial advisor probably knows if the cancer story is legitimate. And if they don't, they can find out. And so the perspective of the trust protector and the financial advisor are absolutely critical for the successful administration of the trust on these complicated issues.
That's a dicey one.
Of course it is. Life is dicey.
But you're right. I mean, that kind of stuff absolutely comes up. And it's like, how do you actually navigate that kind of a request and honor the trust, honor the beneficiaries in the way they were meant to be honored? And, because the other thing is an 18-year-old may not realize that if you get implants and you just leave them in there, you could totally have toxicity in your body. Like, there's maintenance that has to happen. It's not a one-time thing. It's usually a multiple thing because there's issues with growing mold or they disintegrate over time. And okay, this isn't about breast augmentation. There's usually way more to the picture than somebody with something like that than one might realize if it's just totally voluntary for fun. Not fun, but
aesthetics.
Yeah, well, whatever. All right. So.
Yep. So the life is complicated. Trust administration is complicated. Values are complicated. The real world is complicated. And there's nuance and there's judgment calls, and that's where the team approach, this three-legged stool, can really add a ton of value.
Yeah. I think actually maybe a more common, well, I don't know how many of those calls you actually got, but a more common issue could be somebody was left money who had a substance abuse issue, and hey, the money's not for drugs, but it could be for paying for car insurance. Well, my car insurance went up. How do you make sure that the money's going towards what it was intended for? Whether I don't know, do you do bill pay? Okay, cool, great, that's wonderful. So that's one of the biggest ones. Like, the check goes straight to the institution. Right. You get an actual bill, you pay the bill. Right. That kind of stuff.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. If we need $20,000 for the next semester of tuition, we're not cutting a check for $20,000 to the beneficiary. We're cutting a check for $20,000 to the college
for their benefit.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep. Cool. What other thoughts do you have? Let's try to land the plane, and then we'll throw in a couple maybe personal or more on the personal side, lighter side.
There's a risk whenever we go into a deep dive on a specific topic, like who's going to be the trustee, or specifically, the topic of an independent trustee. There's a risk that clients get high-centered and fail to take action.
Right.
I can't get an estate plan until I know who's going to be the trustee. I can't get an estate plan until I know who's going to be the guardian for my minor children if the plane goes down. I can't get an estate plan until we see whether or not little Johnny is going to be a mature adult or not. Those are important questions, but it is far, far, far better to have a plan that you've put in place than deferring to the legislature of your state. which is what you're doing if you do not have your own custom estate plan that's validly created and effective and enforceable. So I say a plan is better than no plan. And all clients ought to, from time to time and somewhat regularly, consider whether or not the plan needs to be updated. So if you haven't yet decided who ought to be the guardian for your minor children, first of all, I get it. I've got minor children. It's a gut-wrenching decision. For most clients, they'd say, there's not a person on the planet that's going to do it the way we do it. There isn't a great option in this hypothetical where mom and dad have passed away. But if you don't make a decision, and if you are in Sedgwick County, Kansas, and the plane goes down, as of today, Judge Rumsey in Sedgwick County District Court Probate Division is going to be the one that makes the decision. He's a good man. He will do everything he possibly can to make the best decision for those kids. However, there is no possible way that he will have the same perspective and access to information that you as mom and dad have.
And he's doing it for a lot of families.
And he has his hands tied. He still has to kind of conform with the norms of Kansas law when he's doing it. And he would, and whether it's this specific judge or the next one or whatever county you're in, I would start with a strong assumption that judge is going to do everything they possibly can, but it's never going to be as much as you can do as mom and dad. So what I would say is make a decision. Get something in place. And then if 6 months later you change your mind, okay, do a quick little amendment. You probably don't even have to have a meeting with the lawyer. Shoot them an email. Say, hey, we changed our mind. It's not going to be Billy. It's going to be Sally. That's so easy to update and change. And so a decision is better than no decision. So if you're not sure who the trustee ought to be, okay, fine. Get your estate plan, make a decision. And if 6 months later you learn something new about some other trustee option, cool. It's a one sentence amendment to the trust. Not a big deal. So make a decision, and then over time you can refine and change the decision.
Well said. Yeah, the worst estate plan is no estate plan. There's too many angles, too much exposure, virtually no asset protection.
Yeah.
And then it's a vacuum when people are grieving. It's not a great recipe. So as hard as it is to make decisions, it's better to make some decisions and take care of it, because we all are terminal.
Yeah, 100% of my clients die. That is reality.
Yep. All right. What other thoughts do you have, Doug, about any other bits of advice that if someone were to take away one thing from this podcast, what would you impress on them?
The thing that is coming to my mind through this conversation is, if I could wave my magic wand, I would have all clients be confident in their areas of expertise. If you're an electrical engineer at Textron, I'll bet you know exactly what you're talking about in that space. I want you to be confident there. But when you come and you sit down with a guy like Mike, your financial advisor, if I could wave my magic wand, I would have you approach that with the spirit to learn and to seek the advice and counsel from somebody that's an expert in this financial planning space. Same thing when you go to talk to your estate planning attorney. When you sit down with your estate planning attorney, if you say, I want a trust and my oldest kid is going to be the trustee, well, you might end up with that plan. And you might think that you've just gotten what you wanted. And you might think that you didn't let the attorney get one over on you. But you likely will get a worse worse experience and a worse end result compared to if you had sat down with that professional advisor and you said, look, I'm pretty darn good at electrical engineering, but I don't know the first thing about successfully creating and implementing and administering an estate plan. I just want to make sure that my family doesn't end up in court, that to the maximum extent possible, we preserve and protect family harmony. We protect assets as well as we can in light of the competing interests. And then at the end of the day, this whole thing works out okay. And I'm here to get some help. That's the posture that produces the best results.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, the other thing is that same person who isn't willing to trust professional services probably is going to do it themselves with our level of access to information today. And who knows, maybe they'll be your next probate client.
That does happen, absolutely. If we had more time, I can tell you those stories.
How expensive probate gets.
Yep.
Yeah, a good estate plan is way cheaper than probate, than a poorly written or poorly planned out estate plan.
Correct.
Uninformedly planned out. Is that a word? That's not a word.
Yeah, sure. Today it is. Ignorantly and ignorantly planned.
Uninformedly and ignorantly.
There you go.
There we go.
Don't do that. That's not the plan you want.
All right. As just a few quick questions. As you've been growing your firm, what's maybe a stage or something in that process that has switched your lens on how to do things, how to grow the business? Because it is a business. It's a little different than some others, but it is a firm is a business.
I'll give you two aha moments. The first one was early on in my business where I was leaning heavily on technology and automation, like I had said. And I actually built a client-facing website where
I remember this, yeah.
Clients could, at 10 o'clock at night on their sofa in their pajamas, they could go through kind of the onboarding intake interview process with my website. And I actually had the technology built, this was back in 2016, where the documents would be prepared immediately and automatically just from whatever the client had entered into the system. And I was thrilled about it. And before I really launched it, I was sitting down with the client in person, old school way, going through the process, and single woman, and we're about an hour in. And multiple times she had referenced her boyfriend. And the way she was talking about her boyfriend, I started to get concerned that there was a chance that she actually was married to him via a common law marriage. And so I kind of started poking around on that topic, and she really wasn't thrilled about my questions. And finally I said, look, I got to know if there's a common law marriage here, because some of the things you're sharing has made me concerned. And she kind of snapped and she said, look, there's no way I could be common law married to my boyfriend because I'm still technically married to my ex. We never finalized the divorce.
Huh.
Well.
Holy cow.
Holy cow. Holy cow. So for an hour.
That matters.
So much. So much. And for those of you that don't know, Mike gets it. He sees the craziness in this, but spouses have rights. Spouses have statutory rights in assets, both during lifetime and also at death.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I'm specifically talking about Kansas law, but I'm unaware of any state where that's not the case. But in Kansas, which is where I practice, absolutely unequivocally for sure, if you are still married to your ex has rights, and we cannot unilaterally disinherit them.
Your ex isn't really your ex.
Exactly, not legally. And so obviously massive pause in that planning process. And what I realized was that every single day of the week, that client would have marked the I'm single box on my online template. And what I realized at that moment was we are not a document production company. We are an advising service.
Right. She could go online and write it up that way, even though it wouldn't hold water.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Because the client doesn't know, in this case, that is a massively critical variable.
How can you discern that from a professional perspective? Like, is there a background check you can run to see if someone's married?
Well, ultimately, we have to rely on the clients, but and that was an unusual scenario. But
actually, you could probably buy it on the dark web.
You probably could. Probably could. So that's part of why I would invite clients to come in with the posture of, hey, look, I don't know what has to happen. I just want it to work. Here's the scoop. It's with that posture that we get the best results. I'm sure you've got clients that come to you for financial planning, but they fail to tell you about the $500,000 at the other institution. Well, that's super relevant. How are we going to have a comprehensive financial plan that covers all the bases with a proper amount of risk and whatever tools that need to be implemented if a quarter of your finances are not considered? It's so relevant. And so clients think they're being wise by either withholding that information or hiding that information or whatever, or they just simply think it's irrelevant. Well, it's extremely relevant. Aha number 2 was it's the shift that many aspiring entrepreneurs have to make. It's the shift from being a freelancer with a cell phone to a business owner. For those that are interested in entrepreneurship and business, I would highly recommend the book, E-Myth Revisited. Have you read that one by chance?
Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
Fantastic book, in my opinion. And when I began Legacy Legal, it was me and a cell phone and a laptop, and clients were hiring me. And
they were imploring you.
There you go. So, among other things. So there's a shift, though, as you grow from being solo to having a little bit of support staff to then having a team with other professional advisors on the team. As a team, the potential to serve clients is far greater. The easy example is I was joking with one of my teammates just this week. If you're wanting to schedule a meeting with me, I am the worst person at Legacy Legal to email. If you need some complex analysis on some nuanced trust strategy, I'm one of the better people to speak with. With a team, we can produce far better results for the client. Mm-hmm. And so that second aha moment is this shift from Doug is the magic to the team is the magic. The business is the magic. The system is the magic.
But Doug is the magic.
Well, I appreciate the humor or the compliment in that, but I have come to believe, and this is the aha moment, I have come to believe that with every fiber of my being, that we can provide better service to the client if we work together as a team. I play a role. I play a critical role. So does the receptionist. So does the paralegal. So does any other member of the team. If any one of us drops the ball, it's not excellent for the client. And it is an aha moment, and frankly, it's a hard shift to for the clients to think of, hey, I'm not hiring Doug. I'm not hiring, specific attorney at specific firm. It's the client is hiring a team. The client is hiring a business, and it's a healthy, functioning business. 10 out of 10 times is going to produce better results than the guy that knows how to do estate planning.
Yeah. Well, and what's really cool with a business is you have the opportunity. So Doug, JD. In your world, there's a lot of people that are Esquire, which I don't really get. But anyways, you're not Esquire, are you?
I am.
All right, Doug Esquire.
All licensed attorneys in Kansas anyways are Esquires, and they have their Juris Doctorates.
Oh, officially? Yeah. I didn't realize
JD is the degree. JD is the degree that you get upon graduating from law school.
Okay.
But that does not a lawyer make you. It's sitting for and passing the bar, and then being sworn in as a member of the bar. It's at that time where you become a licensed lawyer, which is Esquire.
Oh, interesting. I thought some pretentious people just threw that on behind their name.
Well, that may also be true.
I think that's also true. Okay, but I didn't realize there was a legal background to it. Okay, I learned something today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Where was I going? You don't know where I was going, but I did, and now I forgot. Let me put on my thinking cap for just a moment, and we should delete this part.
Delete it.
Oh, yes, business personality. So, Mr. Doug Coe, has a personality. We all have our own personality, and it's like, if there's a circle here, we're a part of it. You're going to be a different part of it. But with a business, what's really cool is you can bring multiple people together to fill up the whole thing.
Sure.
So you get the implementers, the doers, the refiners, the strategy thinkers, the real high thought level, the highly relational, the people you keep in the back closet. That you don't put in front of people.
Right.
But you get the whole mix because from my perspective, God made every one of us unique to fill our role. And if it's just one of us on the bus on the team, that's not a very filled out team.
Right.
So having that team built, you have the opportunity to serve the clients extremely well by building out a well-rounded personality service model and catch all the angles as best you can. Better than just by yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Doug Esquire.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and about Legacy Legal Independent Trustee Services with us here on Real Wealth Podcast. And I look forward to releasing this episode and offering up some education and a little more context perspective for folks curious about estate planning and what their options are, that they don't have to go to a trust company. They can go to a firm with a team and maintain who they're choosing to use while they're alive, keep using them while they're dead, I guess.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. And best of luck to all you out there that are trying to get your affairs in order.
All right. Well, this has been an episode of Real Wealth Podcast sponsored by Stewarded, which is the doing business as of leading edge financial planning. I'll throw in because we have an attorney here. I mean, none of this is legal or financial advice.
Right.
Consult your advisor or your attorney for that.
Yes. None of this is meant to be legal advice, and listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship.
Or advisory relationship.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Sign off.